Hello, everyone. My name is Taryn. I am one of the knowledge and research leads here at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. Hi, and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I do want to go over a brief land acknowledgement. I know we're all here virtually, but we are joining from the ancestral lands of many Indigenous communities. I am currently in Toronto, Treaty 13 territory, and the home of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat peoples, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, and people who may still be unrecorded. As we go through this webinar, I want you to think about how you might be able to support Indigenous students and colleagues in your role to promote a whole campus approach to health and wellness, and also to be an active participant in the reconciliation process. This week, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation at University of Manitoba is hosting a luncheon and learn session every day this week as part of their Truth and Reconciliation Week. I will add the link on the chat so you can register and check out what you can attend. They're all virtual and they seem like great learning opportunities. Before we get started, I do want to go over some housekeeping. So there is closed captioning available at the bottom of the screen. I will go into the next slide soon to show you how you can get French closed captioning. There is also the chat function for discussing thoughts and reactions. There is the Q&A function for submitting questions to the panelist. And the question period will occur at the end. We record all of our webinars and they're available on our website, and they will be available by the end of the day. Slides will be available as well, and our presenter's email will be available if you would like to get in touch with them. So I'm going to briefly go over how you can turn on translated captions. So if you go to the bottom of the screen, you will see the Show Captions button, and I want you to click it. And I want you to turn on the translation toggle. So the circle should go to your right once you press it on. And then make sure your speaking language is set to English. And once you have your English speaking language set to English, you can put your caption language to French or any other language you would like. And you should be able to find the translated captions. And please let me know if you are confused or if you have any questions. Please feel free to put it in the chat and I will try to explain it as much as possible. I'm going to stop sharing my slides now and I will turn it over to our speaker. Paola Carmagnani is here to talk about our topic today on human trafficking, especially pertaining to international students. I will turn it over to you, Paola.
All right, thank you. So just sharing my screen here, you should be able to see it. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I really appreciate the interest in hearing about human trafficking. My name is Paola Carmagnani. I work for the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. So today I'm going to talk about how human trafficking intersects with students in Canada in the post-secondary education system. Human trafficking is not something that it was really something that no community, no school, college or university, no socio-economic group or student demographic really is immune to. Cases of students being trafficked are found in every area of the country, in rural and in suburban settings alike. The goal of the presentation is to give you an overview of who we are and what we do here at the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, to talk about what human trafficking is, how trafficking intersects with immigration, and how students, both domestic and international, can be impacted. I'm going to cover different forms of trafficking and common trends, as well as common myths and misperceptions. And I will finish off by taking you through the role, the scope, and the function of the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline and where to go for help and some of the measures that the post-secondary sector can take. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the land. I am based in Toronto, so I am on land which long served as a site of meetings and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credits, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. As an organization, we acknowledge that we are all treaty people, including those of us who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in the past, and those of us who came here involuntarily as transatlantic, as a result of the transatlantic slave, or more recently as asylum seekers and refugees. We want to base our actions on the principle of mutual respect, trust, collaboration in the spirit of true reconciliation. So the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, we are a national charitable organization. We were established in 2015 with a mission to end all forms of human trafficking in Canada. The Centre focuses on mobilizing collective action and system change, and was developed to enhance collaboration across all sectors, including the governments, the private sector, the non-for-profit, and the Canadian public. It really functions as a backbone organization, and does so by supporting cross-sectorial efforts, by sharing information and best practices, by bringing stakeholders together to find solutions to addressing this issue. The organization is both privately and publicly funded. It's also the operator of the 24/7 National Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, which was developed with support from the Federal Department of Public Safety Canada, among other donors. And some of the things that the Centre does, it does primary research and data collection, work to educate communities, networks, service providers, participate in provincial and federal consultations to inform legislative developments. We collaborate with the United States and the Mexico hotlines on human trafficking, Polaris and Consejo, respectively, on best practices and trends, among some of the other things that we do. Now, what is human trafficking? To put it simply, human trafficking is a form of exploitation. Section 279 of the Criminal Code pertains to human trafficking and states that every person who recruits, transports, transfers, receives, holds, conceals, or harbors a person, or exercises control, direction, or influence over the movements of a person for the purpose of exploiting them or facilitating, so indirectly, right, the exploitation, is guilty of an indictable offense. So trafficking requires the existence of these three aspects. There is always an act, a means or tactics or strategy used, and an intended purpose, which is to take advantage of someone for a benefit, a profit. It can be monetarily or some other forms of benefit or gain. Physical violence is not a requirement for the establishment of the offense, nor is the movement of the person. Although sex trafficking victims are often moved from one place to another for different reasons, such as, for example, to escape the detection of law enforcement, to isolate the victim, or to feed new markets, movement is not a requirement in itself for the establishment of the offense. Trafficking is a crime in Canada since 2005, which is when the provision was added to the Criminal Code. And human trafficking is a crime that is often described as being hidden in plain sight. There are few crimes more challenging for communities to recognize and address. And for many people, the reality of trafficking in their community is difficult to comprehend, and let alone to confront. Now, a word on language before I proceed. What is the right terminology for somebody affected by human trafficking? The Criminal Code of Canada talks about victims. So throughout this presentation, when referring to individuals who have experienced human trafficking, you will hear me saying victims and survivors or survivors. The term victim is usually used when the act of trafficking in persons is ongoing and the person is in that situation, where a survivor rather describes a person who has escaped or exited a trafficking situation and may have started a healing process. So that is the difference. Here at the center, we recognize that victimization and survivorship are not mutually exclusive terms or experiences, and that individuals who have experienced exploitation may prefer one term over another to describe their experiences. Now, while comprehensive data on students affected by human trafficking in Canada is limited, it's recognized as a significant issue affecting vulnerable populations, including children and youth. Human trafficking is a violent crime that exploits the most vulnerable, depriving victims of their normal lives, forcing them to provide labor or sexual services through coercion and control. The two most prevalent forms of trafficking in Canada are sex and labor trafficking. Other forms include organ and tissue trafficking, forced marriage, domestic servitude, trafficking for the purpose of forced criminality, trafficking for the purpose of forced begging, trafficking for the purpose of forced adoption, and so on. Sex trafficking typically involve 4 different recruitment and exploitation phases, and we see this a lot in the Canadian context. And yes, we are going to share the slides afterwards. Luring which is the first phase, always implies testing the waters, finding out about vulnerabilities and boundaries, assessing if it's the right person to target, collecting as much information as possible, giving attention while making the person feeling safe and special. Grooming is usually the second phase. It's a phase where all seems good. There are feelings of love, of safety, of something big going on in your life, lots of promises of a future, a family, a home, a job, or an income, or stability. There are gifts, going out for shopping, while the collection of personal information is ongoing. It is also a phase where drugs may be introduced under the guise of having fun. And the third phase then is isolation. Isolation is the key technique, which consists in isolating the victim from the safety nets to gain better control. The last phase in series is manipulation and coercion. Exploitation can take place because of complex techniques of manipulation of coercion. They take different forms depending on who is behind. If the trafficker is posing as a boyfriend, they will use emotional techniques, play with feelings of love, giving and withdrawing attention, asking for favors, express rather indirect or subtle threats, like really in subtle ways. It's what's known in the sector as the Romeo pimp, the trafficker who uses love and emotions, which is a very, very common tactic used in Canada among the youth. Often the person being trafficked does not realize that what is going on is abusive, intentional, interested. This form of manipulation creates a state of high confusion and a sense of being lost or disassociated from the reality. Threats, more or less direct, can be expressed against loved ones, family members, and friends. If drugs are in the picture, the trafficker will draw on drug addictions to make the victim have sex for drugs or money, make them feel indebted to them. During the phase of exploitation, the victim has often a low self-esteem, this feeling of being indebted, that they own the abuser financially. There is emotional, there is mental, there is physical abuse, intimidation, control, confinement, and isolation from the family members and from friends. Victims may also face consequences if they attempt to escape. It is really a pervasive form of human rights abuse. And sex trafficking can take place in person or virtually. So it also includes sexual exploitation online, social media, on social media platform through sexual imagery or video. The typologies of sex trafficking include forced escorting, coercive, illicit massage work, forced pornography, forced stripping. In human trafficking, consent is not a determinant factor. Children and youth under the age of 18, in any case, cannot legally engage in sex work or exchange sex for money, for drugs, for alcohol, for shelter, for transportation, food, or any other necessity. But consent, the fact that the person consented to it when there is manipulation, coercion, control, is not a defense for the trafficker that can be used by the trafficker. Now, moving on, labor trafficking is another very pervasive and challenging form of modern day slavery. Sometimes you will have heard of this term, modern day slavery or forced labor. It's again the control and exploitation of a person for their labor or services. It is the same criminal code provision in Canada, and hence similarly, it uses force, threats, deception. It is the purpose here, which is different. The purpose is to take advantage of the manual or the intellectual labor of another person. Labor trafficking often includes people forced to work in very poor and unsafe working conditions, abuse, extreme long hours, unfair, non-existent wages. Just a note, when I say forced to work, so labor trafficking involves situation of debt bondage. You might have heard the term bonded laborers. It's a form of forced labor whereby victims become bonded laborers when their labor becomes the means of repaying back what is often an impossibly large loan or debt. In Canada, common types of labor trafficking situations that we see include situations where people are forced to work in homes as domestic workers, nannies, housekeepers, farm workers are coerced through violence, harassment, and intimidation, threats of deportation as well as they harvest crops, or factory workers who are held in substandard conditions with little, sometimes with no pay, and situations where international students are scammed in the immigration process, becomes victim of fraud, are misled, end up in situations of financial and social hardship that make them easy prey, are common situations too. With regard to remedies and protection, it is important to notice that a person's immigration status is irrelevant in their entitlement to protection from trafficking or as a worker. Accessibility to protection is hindered by other factors that we will see later, not strictly speaking by the laws and remedies themselves. So how does human trafficking look like in practice? It is often not what it looks. And in Canada, there are many myths and misperceptions as to what human trafficking is and isn't. So I will review them briefly. First of all is smuggling. So it should be noted here that human trafficking and smuggling are often used interchangeably, but they are in fact two distinct things. Smuggling involves the illegal movement of a human being across an international border to which they have consented. Smuggling is transnational in the sense that migrant smuggling always crosses international borders and is a crime against a nation's borders. It involves a transaction or payment, often in advance. Individuals are often not fully aware of the inherent danger of the smuggling process and do not oftentimes receive adequate information as to what is going to happen, what are the risks, what are the actors involved, and what is their role. But an individual agrees to be moved. So smuggling of migrants, for example, by definition, does not involve the exploitation of the migrants. On the other hand, human trafficking involves exploiting someone for a sexual service or labor, for example. It can be domestic, does not have to be transnational. Human trafficking victims do not also consent to the activity, and it does not require movement across an international boundary. It is a crime against a person's rights, a person's human rights and dignity, not against a nation's borders. Both of them, of course, are illegal activities that treat people as commodities, and they're often confused in the media and so on. The two can intersect. So some trafficked people might start their journey by being smuggled into a country illegally, not knowing the intention of the trafficker and of the smuggler, or they find themselves deceived, coerced, or forced into an exploitative situation later on in the process. For example, being forced to work to pay back for the service with little money, but the two should not be are not to be confused. So this is one of the common misconceptions. But there are a lot of other myths out there. Human trafficking, for example, involves foreign nationals being brought into Canada against their will. It is a big city problem. It targets women and girls. It starts with kidnapping. Traffickers target people they don't know and held them against their will. So I want to shed some light into all of this. First of all, human trafficking affects Canadians. It's not something that happens only to foreign nationals. Precarious status is certainly an added factor that can be exploited, but Canadians are victims of trafficking. And it takes place in big cities as well as in urban areas, in small towns, in rural regions. Girls and women are targeted, but also men, boys, and gender non-conforming, transgender individuals who are actually overrepresented. So in that sense, it does not discriminate. It's important to stress that as well. And because of these complex techniques of control and coercion that we saw before, people are not locked in chains or behind bars. They don't need to be. The control is done in a different way. It's done mentally, it's done psychologically or emotionally, and it's harder to see, it's harder to detect. So in addition, as we've seen before, is that not necessarily involve the movement or the crossing of a border. It really takes place to our friends, neighbors, family, friends, children, right where we work, where we live, where we study. Moving on, labor trafficking is a supply chain problem and happens in foreign countries. We often hear this. It is not wrong per se, but also not necessarily true, in the sense that it's not only something that affects Canada because of the supply chain and because of Canada importing goods and services produced by forced labor in another country. So that is the case. Canada right now is reacting to this issue with some initial legislation that came into force last year to combat human trafficking in the supply chain. So Canada is paying attention to that, but this is really not the full picture, and it should not divert attention to problems outside of our boundaries, as we have issues inside our borders too. And people find it really hard to believe that this is going on in our country. The legislation that was passed last year, it lacks teeth. I will not go into that now, but people find it really hard to believe that in Canada, not abroad, in 2024, we still have situations of forced labor. And to finish off here, and very importantly, the myth that perhaps has been the most harmful to sex workers is that all commercial sex is sex trafficking. The commercial sex industry is an industry that sees individuals entering into it and remaining out of free will and selling sex autonomously without being forced by anyone or being, or controlled. And then the same industry also does see the same industry does also see, of course, human trafficking victim, which is individuals forced to enter the sex industry against their will and ended up being exploited, or they entered out of free will, but then afterwards the exploitation started. So the two things, commercial sex and sex trafficking, need to be separated. And the last one is temporary foreign worker, being a win-win, and temporary foreign worker are better off here than in the country of origin. This is something Canadians struggle with a lot too. The temporary foreign worker program is the immigration stream where we see the most cases of exploitation taking place. And the government has become aware of the numerous issues with this immigration system and this program, labor program, and is taking some measures to address the systemic issues. These are all myths and misconceptions. On the screen, yes, it's all misperceptions, and I'm unpacking them here. So I was saying that the temporary foreign worker program, the government is reacting to that. Last year, I don't know whether you followed that, but the United Nations Special Envoy on Human Trafficking, called the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery, came and visited the country and did a deep dive into that program. And the government has committed to taking measure and reforming the program. So we expect to hear some announcements late in the next few months. Then students and grooming. Now, peer-to-peer grooming, online grooming, intra-community forms of grooming from landlords is something that we see really daily. Students are vulnerable to trafficking. Their age make them vulnerable. Considerations to do with social status, self-esteem, family ties or absence of family ties, their economic situation, their financial needs, unmet needs, or other really personal situation that condition them into risky behaviors. Not because they themselves take risks, but because they are targeted based on these vulnerabilities. So students may be new to a city or a town where they're studying, and it is at the same time this phase of freedom and of uncertainty. These on the screen are real situations affecting the youth. For example, I'm going to read through them. My friend, to keep it really real, My friends are getting paid to have sex with older guys. They said I could make money too. I could use the cash. My friends' boyfriends will help me, but he'll take a cut. My parents keep me out. I have nowhere to stay. Someone is offering me a couch in exchange for sex. My boyfriend owes this guy a favor. He says I'll have to do it once and then we are exclusive. I met this amazing new guy. He bought me gifts, took me out, we partied. Now he says I have to pay him back. He convinced me to take and send him like hot photos and make money. Now I'm being pressured into live streaming sex. These are some of the peer-to-peer situations where there is luring and grooming. And traffickers who groom a student online, a lot is taking place nowadays, of course, online, may befriend the person over time, expose them to porn, encourage to explore sexuality, and verbalize threats to injure them or others, like family members or friends. Some other ways in which grooming can happen, and this, which is this process of really building trust, gaining the trust of the targeted individual and having them feeling attached to them. And then the trauma bond takes then place. So this is really very circular. There is in the beginning love bombing, giving lots of attention and gifts. Drugs may be introduced, then the person uses their position of authority to control you. There is these items or, filling needs, food, shelter, promises. Trust starts to be built, but then at the same time, these feelings of being asked to do things you may feel uncomfortable with, or you may feel they are wrong. But then again, there is love bombing, giving again attention and gifts. So it's very circular. And it's really this phase of very, high confusion and this feeling of really being lost. Particularly now with regard to international students. International students have unique vulnerabilities, an added layer, I would say, of vulnerabilities and targeting factors to different forms of human trafficking. And this includes labor exploitation, sex trafficking, or domestic forms of trafficking. So we do need to pay particular attention to international students and their realities. In these factors include lack of financial sustainability, which leads to gaps in resources to pay rent, purchase food, tuition, other expenses. Lack of financial sustainability can be strictly linked to how students are recruited to Canada, even before they come, and what expectations and understanding they have prior to arrival. Recruiters, and this is both in Canada and abroad, can lead students into believing that Canada is a dream destination. It's easy to study and work, earn enough to cover year 2 tuition fees, even send money back home. So when families get indebted and they, which is not rare, they do get indebted to send one son or one daughter abroad with such high expectations, the stress to do well in school, which alone, that type of stress can be challenging, right? But that stress added to the complexity of settling in a foreign country with a foreign culture and norms, and at the same time to provide, can have a big impact on students' well-being in general, mental health, self-confidence, and may push them into unsafe situations without being able to recognize that these situations are unsafe. And in addition, international students are required to show proof of funding. The amount was increased from $10,000 to be deposited into a bank account in Canada to over $20,000 this year. Those students who were borrowing money to come to Canada and study here are now borrowing money and still, but have a higher level of debt. At the same time, they are restricted in the number of hours they can legally work in Canada while studying and while attending school. So regulations, as you will know, introduced this year limit them to 24 hours a week off campus during the school year. So this rule is somehow disconnected from the reality, has the intent of the good intent of directing international students to a balanced lifestyle, balancing work and study, but does not recognize the reality that students who have to work will still work under the table, will be even more vulnerable to being exploited, less likely to report, and fear consequences for them illegally working, including the fear of losing their study permits and being deported. Employers, the bad ones, of course, they play games with these fears. They instill fear themselves to direct and control the worker, who is a cheap workforce, is disposable, unprotected. Students are paid less than minimum wage, not paid at all for extra hours, have no work accident insurance in those situations, no stable income, no payslip, and very volatile cash transfers hand to hand. So it's fiscal fraud and it's exploitation at the same time. It can be intra-community. You tend to gravitate towards people who share similar backgrounds and languages. And international students are susceptible to debt bondage, a lack of knowledge relating consent and the laws of Canada relating to sexual violence. International students often lack family supports in country and face cultural barriers, which make them susceptible to being taken advantage of. For example, they may not view the police as an institution that can afford them protection. They may have engaged in sexual activities against their own cultural norms, hence having a feeling of guilt, shame. Pregnancies can come into the picture. When that happens, and it does, it's not something you may be able to share with your family back home. So withdrawing information, pretending everything is good, becomes a pattern and a downward spiral. Suicide rates and at-risk pregnancies are part of the picture. So the enhanced vulnerability factors of international students lay really at different levels, at the individual level, at the household and family level, at the level of the community, and at the structural level. Settlement, and this is a structural factor, is a journey. So as your life continues and you are learning different things, there is no time frame really as to when somebody should feel settled. So it changes and you're learning like new things as you are in new situations. But what is the settlement framework for international students in Canada? Canada has a system in place whereby IRCC, which is Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, is responsible for the immigration and settlement services for newcomers. These services exclude all temporary residents, such as asylum claimants, temporary foreign workers, in high or in low stream jobs, a wage stream job, and international students, they are excluded. So there are a number of elements at the structural level that we need to understand and focus our attention to. I'll add here that the exception to international students not being eligible to IRCC-funded immigration and settlement services is the new Francophone minority community student pilot, which was just announced by Minister Mark Miller, the Minister of Immigration, which contains a series of exceptions, like this one, whereby, international students, the Francophone ones in the selected geographic areas, so a very restricted program, they will now have direct access to permanent residency, settlement services, a discount of 25% in tuition fees outside of Quebec. This is outside of Quebec. But this is really a small number pilot. It does not apply to, all international students. Now, indicators of sex trafficking. Sorry, I haven't moved this slide. Here, indicators of sex trafficking. These are some of the indicators. They are not to be taken in isolation. It's often a combination of these, but it's important to flag them. Unexplained withdrawal from friends, a sudden change in physical appearance or in your behavior, provided scripted answers, really being secretive about something. It might be a new situation, a new person, a new friend, a new boyfriend. Also, your body language expresses fear of intimidation, you avoid eye contact, you may be absent from school or from work or from home. There may be signs of physical abuse, but it's really the behavior most of anything. Sometimes tattoos, because traffickers like to brand with tattoos in their name, or not really being in possession of identity documents, because these are withdrawn, so they are taken from them. These are some of the signs, but again, to be taken in combination. And for labor exploitation, some of the signs are similar, like not having access to identity documents, expressing fears, intimidation, not being free or able to go from your living quarters to your workplace, or being transported to and from, working, also providing these scripted, mechanical, robotic answers to everyday, really normal questions, working long hours, having no contract, being underpaid, lacking appropriate safety equipment, having portions of your pay taken away, withdrawn from you, and overcrowded and unsanitary, substandard accommodation. Again, not in isolation, combination oftentimes of these factors, excuse me. Now, before I tell you about what the hotline does and how the hotline can be also a resource, a tool for you, I wanted to just spend a moment to look at what the role of the post-secondary sector could be. Bill 132, the Sexual Violence and Harassment Action Plan of 2016, as you will know, requires colleges and universities to have policies for the prevention of sexual harassment and gender-based harassment. So this is a good starting point and is a central piece. Human trafficking really sits in the broader spectrum of gender-based violence, but we need to go further than this. The Ontario Ministry of Education has introduced a new policy framework 2 years ago and mandated that school boards put together anti-human trafficking protocols to better protect students in the elementary, middle, and senior school. The framework is really unique in Canada, places Ontario as a leader. However, human trafficking does not stop after grade 12. Post-secondary students are very much concerned. So the post-secondary sector has a role to play, and it can be broken down, if you want, in 3 pillars: the one of prevention, of protection, and of partnership. So colleges and universities under each pillar can play a significant role in combating human trafficking through various strategies. So I wanted to start to give you some ideas and direction as to some of the areas you could expand on. Education and awareness is one of them. Integrate human trafficking awareness into the curriculum across multiple disciplines. Host workshops, invite guest speakers to educate students and staff about the issue. Research, conduct and support research on human trafficking to better understand its causes, mechanisms, and effective interventions. Universities can collaborate with NGOs, government agencies, and other institutions to gather data and develop evidence-based solutions. Training programs is another strategy that offer specialized training for students in fields such as law enforcement, social work, healthcare, education, to recognize and respond to trafficking. Campus safety initiatives, so implement measures to ensure campus safety and prevent human trafficking within the university community. So this includes training campus security, providing safe reporting mechanisms, ensuring a supportive environment for survivors, and also central to prevention, I would add here. So prevention goes through having a good support systems for students. So what we heard from students that works best is when they had coaching and guidance from senior students. International centers try their best, but there isn't enough staff to support students individually, and students come in large groups. Plus, it does not only affect international students, it's really both. So having students from the same university help. Like it's in a way to identify barriers, challenges, educate others in how to tackle them. Moving on in terms of protection, having response protocols. We have heard that some universities have already started to work on having protocols in place. So if you don't have them yet, to respond to incidents and complaints, to disclosures, have early warning mechanisms or primary interventions. Students' input must be considered when developing and reviewing gender-based violence protocols. It's important to have reintegration policies when they are ready to come back to their studies. Safety spaces, both in person, create connections and a welcoming, non-judgmental environment or space. Make a good use of communication, of technology, innovation. So you can utilize technology to combat trafficking, such as like data analysis to identify local trafficking patterns, online platforms for reporting and helping victims, and apps to raise awareness. Confidentiality, I cannot stress this one enough. Confidentiality and trust are super important. Victims and survivors and individuals at risk need to know that their stories and experiences will be respected and their information is going to be handled with care and that they own their data. So seeking and obtaining at all times their consent and agreement in everything you do must be at the forefront. A question shared in advance by some of you was asking about this point. So how to better access these students to give them proper information and support, considering that they fear you will report them. So it's exactly this. You don't have to report. It's their choice. And it's important to create an environment of trust and respect Yes, they fear reporting, and they should not. It is our role to have social agreements and publicly shared protocols, give them prior informed options and information as to what happens after a disclosure, such as to enable conversations about human trafficking. It should not be a taboo. We need to face the reality. It is happening, it is taking place, and we need to talk about it. Also, the hotline is confidential, can be used anonymously, and I'll talk about it in a second. I saw in some universities kids' health phone displayed. They also serve young adults. So, but the hotline number visible in your premises, on campus, in libraries, is in washrooms, is another tools for them to feel, okay, there is an anonymous service where I can share some of my experiences. But also the sharing of confidential and disaggregated data is important for the government, for you to share the data. This is important for the government to better understand the issue of trafficking. Already as it is now, colleges and universities are required to collect and submit information pertaining to the number of incidents and complaints reported by students, the number of times you gave support, about the accommodations and the services obtained by students. So the data can be complemented by human trafficking specific data and ultimately improve data collection in Canada, which is very, very limited. Aside of the hotline data, which is the only national data set independent from the police in Canada, the only available data that exists solely relies on reports to the police. So, which is really the tip of the iceberg. This is a massively underreported crime. And then finally, partnership, support services. This means like provide support services for trafficking survivors, including counseling, legal aid, educational opportunities. So establishing partnership with local organizations that specialize in helping victims, getting to know their services, providing information on campus about these services, in school premises, invite them in to talk, to present. Advocacy and policy, engage in advocacy efforts. You have a role to play in that as well, to influence public policy and legislations related to human trafficking, the vulnerability of students. University can use, you have a platform, you can use your platform to raise awareness, promote policy changes at the local, at the provincial and national level. And then community engagement. So partner with local communities to raise awareness and develop prevention programs. Universities can work with local businesses, community organizations to educate the public as well and create a network of vigilance and more opportunities for students. So really, by leveraging resources, expertise, influence, you can make a substantial impact in the fight against human trafficking. I'm aware of time. I will wrap up, but I wanted to give you really a snapshot of the hotline. This is the confidential toll-free 24/7 number to reach out to the hotline. We answer in English and French, and there is an interpretation service in more than 200 languages. The hotline, so what happens when you call the hotline and what services do we provide? The first thing that we do at the beginning of every call is safety planning with victims who want to leave a trafficking situation or those who are not quite ready to exit. So we can talk through what a healthy relationship looks like, safety planning with families, loved ones. We provide emotional support, listen without judgment. We believe survivors. We can discuss reporting or potential cases that might look like, trafficking for the caller. Our focus is on information and referral resources. We do not report to the police unless requested by the caller or if we are mandated to report. So a warm connection, like a referral to a relevant organization, is something that we always try to do, to connect them with somebody locally. And then we can provide general information as well. Anyone can call the hotline. The first category of individuals calling into the hotline are victims and survivors. The second is family members and friends, but it is really a service for everyone, even for educators. The needs of survivors are very broad, and obviously there is a hierarchy that should be acknowledged based on each individual situation. Safety and security is certainly very important, but we do have a broad range of services in our National Referral Directory, which is on our website, public facing, and we also have an internal version, which is a bit of a bigger, if you want, directory. So, of course, we the hotline generally will only disclose information that the caller has consented to sharing with the referral agency. So on the onset of every call, we inform of a duty to report. We are mandated reporters and want to ensure that all callers are informed, and we have this duty to report where a person discloses information about a minor who may be at risk or anyone who may be in imminent danger to themselves or to others. What we are not, clearly, we are not an investigative body. We will not interfere with any law enforcement operations. We do not seek to replace any other operating hotlines. We will not deter individuals from calling directly the police or 911. And we are a referral services, not, yes, I will be providing you with the website, and we have two websites in the chat. I'll put that in the chat. This is the National Referral Directory. You can access it from the webpage at the bottom, canadianhumantraffickinghotline.ca, which is one of our two websites. The other is Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking.ca. I will wrap it up in consideration of the time. We have a number of services. These are some of the gaps. I left some slides for you about some research and reports that we published, available on our webpage. We also have promotional material that you might want to download and print. They are accessible to anyone. If you reach out to me, I will also be able to do a delivery and post them over to you. I left also some data about trends and the things, some of the things, numbers that we see on the hotline. Although we are really one small touch point for survivors to access services, this does not represent the reality, which is much broader, of human trafficking in Canada. And I also left my email address here because I'd be interested in continuing the conversation. I'm very interested in receiving questions even by email, and in generally speaking, remaining in contact with you. And yes, thank you. That is the webpage, Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking.ca. So at this point, I'll perhaps open it up to the floor to see if you have any comments, reflections. Maybe you want to share some of the initiatives that are going on, some of the things that you're thinking of, that I also really would be very interested in hearing. I'm I know of some very good initiatives that are going on at the moment in some constituencies in Ontario, but might not know about all of them. And of course, if you have any questions, thank you. I'm here for that.
Thanks so much, Paula. Again, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for going over all of this and very, very crucial things that we should know about. I do see a few questions in the Q&A that we can potentially go through. We do have a question asking about getting involved. So how can we become more involved with the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, in particular the hotline? Are there volunteer opportunities or an intake process?
There is an intake process. We don't take volunteers because of the confidentiality and the sensitivity of data that we handle, but we regularly recruit. And something that you could do, if you go on Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, at the very bottom, you can sign up to our communications. You can receive in that way our newsletters, announcements. It's a way to stay in touch with us. And also in the National Referral Directory, we you will be able to filter the services that you need, and there is a filter about volunteering opportunity. For example, if you're interested in volunteering with a local anti-human trafficking organization, or if you wanted simply for us to put you in touch perhaps with some organizations that are based where you are or close to you, you can write to us at info@, or you can write to me personally and I'll transfer those requests.
Wonderful. I do have another question asking, do you have statistic numbers on human Canadian trafficking in the last 5 years involving children under 15 years old?
The Canadian Centre for Child Protection has wonderful programs and has data collection specifically pertaining to cases of minors. Now, on the hotline, we gather, analyze, and disseminate disaggregated data. In the first 3 years of operations, we have identified over 1,500 cases of trafficking, but we are very careful in in the data that we publish, and we don't necessarily know the age of somebody who calls into the hotline. If they are 17 or if they are 21, they might not disclose that. We start off the call by saying, welcome to the you've reached the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, and then are you safe to talk? And then we explain that we have a duty to report. So because they hear, if I'm a minor, they might have to report me. Sometimes they don't disclose that information. And they might do that later on in the follow-up calls. But for that reason, we don't actually break it down by age groups at this point in time, because we feel it's not a reliable data point. Now, the data set from the police, very, very much the tip of the iceberg. That, as I was saying before, is the only nationally, available data set in Canada, breaks that down. So if you're interested, I can point you to that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And there's another question. I think you have gone over this, but if someone calls the hotline, are they informed of the criteria for mandated reporting?
Yes, they are. And I didn't mention this perhaps, but it is also possible to reach out to us by web form, by email, or by chat. The young people, the youth, usually prefer chat, or the ones who are in a very risky situation and they might not be able to make noise or talk over the phone, they will silently chat with us.
Wonderful. Alrighty, I think we are done with questions asked for now. However, if you do have any more questions later, you're welcome to reach me, or you can contact Paula because she has the email up there. And this recording for this webinar will be posted on our website at the end of the day. Please fill out our feedback survey after this webinar ends. We really, really value your input, and we like to hear whether, what you'd like to see coming up on our monthly webinar series. Paula, thank you so much for this great presentation. I know everybody here is feeling the same. We are very grateful that you were able to talk about this topic. And thank you folks
Thank
for
you for the
showing up.
invitation. Yes, have a good rest of your day. And as said, I remain available. So bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks you so much for coming. We'll see you later.